Jordan Gerding. I recently moved back down here. I actually was one of the first initial that came down here when you and Bree moved down, and it was just Addie and Kendall at the time. Even then, just a small group of us slowly starting to meet and gather around. Even before, really, I think a whole lot of the church planting was really started. It was a few years before I think you guys officially launched. And yeah, it was just, I remember, as I tell people, I was ready to follow you into hell even if we only had squirt guns because we could take it on. And it was a joy about, what was it, about a year and a half ago now that Chris and I started meeting and I started talking about potentially coming back down, and it was a really exciting thing to begin that process again and come back. So this season's had its challenges with it. It's interesting because for me, it's been so much chaos and upheaval for the past 2, 3, maybe 4 years. It's been quite a while of a lot of ups and downs, and really learning how to deal with what would be considered probably crippling anxiety type situations, work not working out, a marriage failing, being regularly in financial situations where I used to be in a place where had half a year's worth of savings at least in the bank, and that was normal, and being in a place of being in debt and just trying to figure out how to make things meet, starting my own business, exiting out of the family business. It was a lot, and coming into this season right before the whole corona pandemic outbreak happened and the stay-at-home orders, I'd really been meaningfully taking between exiting my job with the family company and really jumping full on into my own business. Took probably about a 5-month quasi-sabbatical period. I was still working on building out parts of my business, but wasn't actively really seeking it. And right as I was finally kind of like, yeah, I think I'm gonna go out, and then this whole situation hit and obviously shut things down. Being someone who's stepping into the life coaching, executive business coaching field, there's obviously not a whole lot of finances going around. And so that's been a difficulty in learning how to just be patient and trust God in the midst of it, not let anxiety in the bank account be the dictator of how I feel, where I let my anxiety rise or make excuses for that. Also in the midst of it, I've had my house listed since end of last August for sale. It finally got everything together and basically had the inspection happen right after this whole pandemic hit, and then about 4 days before the closing was supposed to happen, it got postponed. We just recently found out that it's going to likely close here at the end of the month, but I was already down here, committed to a lease, moved stuff, put stuff in storage, and was counting on that money to come through to be making sure I could pay it. And we resolved it in the end, but that was a really challenging aspect. And with it, a final slight challenge of finally getting to be down here, but not being able to connect with everyone that I was so excited to after commuting down a couple times a week since September. And finally I was like, yes, I get to be here, I get to see everyone. And then it's like, well, I guess I stay at home with my 2 cats like I've been doing. Yeah, despite there being significant challenges and setbacks, it's almost like the same things have victory scenarios in them, because even though there's the whole issue with the house sale, I got to see God come through in a lot of ways with resolving issues with the buyer, of creating a cash flow means for me to be going through all of this, being able to still be down here and being a part of the community, and still feeling the means of connecting a lot easier than it was before. And just knowing I'm in the area, there's just that spiritual shift that occurs. In the midst of it too, it's been a blessing with some of the corona pandemic relief things, with some of the unemployment changes and stuff, that while this is happening, it's allowing me to really focus on some key aspects of my business, which a major portion is I've started writing a book that on a whole course of helping people really connect with God and focusing on really the relational aspect of helping people walk through, see that failure is okay in the midst of it, but progressive stages, that isn't like this step and this step and this step happens, but being able to give kind of a guideline and a lens. As the past year, as I've talked with people about it, they've been really wowed, and so I'm really spending some time investing in that and being able to develop that and really plan my business strategy, while also at the same time, that's work that doesn't get you paid normally, but now when the unemployment finally kicks back and is retroactive, it's like I'm getting paid to do that stuff, and it's legitimate, valid work, which is exciting in that aspect of things. In this season, I've really gotten to experience some really awesome aspects of developing a deeper relationship with God. As I mentioned before, this is kind of 2 months on the end of a 3 or 4 year season, and a huge portion of it that I see is I used to be so tied up in my budgets and bank accounts and the details of watching all the dollars and cents. While that can be good, is definitely a lot of times where it's like I have plenty of money, but seeing the bank account drop would cause a lot of anxiety, and really getting to work with Jesus and the Holy Spirit of sitting down and just being able to say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to be afraid. Even seeing points where it's like, well, I don't know how I'm going to pay all the bills this month, but I have a couple of years of God doing miraculous stuff in very miraculous but very tangible, practical, unmiraculous looking ways of providing finances and means at just the right time to get me through to the next season. And so choosing to engage in that. Another thing that, especially over the past probably several weeks or month, of really developing a lot more of a heart for the lost people and reaching out, which most people who knew me from back a decade ago would be surprised by that, because I grew up in the church where they promoted to a degree that you could be any part in the evangelistic process, but you didn't have to be the ones outreaching and doing that, and that always made me uncomfortable, and grew up in a time in the church when it really wasn't done well a lot of times. It was a lot more stand on the street corner and yell at people. But really developing that heart now where I'm thinking of ways, and especially when things open back up, of getting on the campus and looking at how I can use some of my coaching talents and certifications as a means of getting access onto there and helping people in a really tangible way, and providing a means of building a relationship and foundation. So being a part of a life group, it's been exciting to get to be looking and using, especially in this time I have more time, of serving and looking for ways to engage on a community team, because I really didn't have the ability to do that back when I was up in Corvallis for a bit under Pastor Seth. And when the divorce happened, he really wisely said, you need to step back, because you're just filling the gap instead of really dealing with the hurt and pain. You're just trying to get busy and fill it all. So it's been a long couple years of not being in engaging and serving purposefully because I needed that time. And so being back, getting to serve my community, getting to be plugged in, it's just so valuable. It's the work we do together that connects us, I believe, even if it's individually on our own in this time, that drives the relational piece and the depth that we get to experience more so than simply just existing in the same space as each other. It's driving towards the same purpose, and it's been such a blessing. Just, I think, as I mentioned before, a blessing of getting to come back down here, that even though it's not face to face with people, getting to help out and actually getting to commit to things, and knowing that I have the ability, and it's not a 45-50 minute drive to get down here and do something. I'm just minutes away now is so exciting and helps connecting so much more. Ever since getting to even just be a part of it, driving and commuting down, which is funny because that's how it started. Before I would commute down, I think I even remember one year when we had the snowpocalypse, I was still driving down and making life group in church when other people in Eugene weren't making it. My front wheel drive Honda Civic with some chains on, but there's just a level that commitment brings to a church family, and engagement, and building those long-term relationships within it. And I think the thing that I so value about getting to be back down here is it's living out my value of you commit to a church family. You don't just leave when things get hard. You push in, and especially when you have to admit something's wrong about yourself and killing that pride and desire to just make yourself look good. Having that honesty like that, that's what it's all about. You never see a church split happen in the New Testament in Acts. You see Paul and Barnabas get in a fight over someone who abandoned them and whether or not he's trustworthy, and they split their ways, but they don't split over the gospel. They don't split and say we can't be around each other or do ministry. They're still your friends. It's just a level of who they could trust, and they still engaged, and they're still the whole church. And it wasn't a splintering of figuring out where you could go best. It was relying on each other to help one another, and it's the people that they had your back. They had you as a means of being connected and safe in a community, oftentimes where it wasn't very welcome or very applicable to be on your own. And I think we miss a lot of that in our modern day churches. It's so consumer based. It's about what can I get and where can I go that's got the best means and methods of giving me what I want, when it's all about being a community and a family together, and not in a cultish way or any sorts where you have to stay and you can't leave or go anywhere else, but it's the commitment. It's just like any other relationship. It's the commitment that makes it and drives it, and it's commitment that is what enables love to happen. And that's what I believe. The Apostle John, when he spoke about loving one another and people seeing that and knowing it, it's when people get to hear the story, I'm sure one day, where it's, Jordan, you left and you had to eat crap by coming back down and admitting wrong, and like, why would you do that? It's like, because it's so worth it. I wanted to, and it's what you do. It's how communities formed. It's how the church is meant to be, and that speaks volumes to people in a culture where you take offense at whatever you want as a means of exiting out of a relationship you don't want to be a part of. I think there's just so much to be said against that, and to be shown in true action that it will attract so many people to the gospel, because they see people who are committed and aren't going to flake out on them or run away when things get ugly or nasty. I think our church community has, be careful of saying this because I'm not intimately connected with all the churches down here, but just knowing how unchurched Eugene is, how intellectual the Northwest is, but the priority that every nation especially puts on spiritual giftings, I think I'm excited to see us engaging in that, and not that it's this weird display of, I think of 1 Corinthians, where it's a display of the spiritual gifts to try and improve superiority among each other, or in our case of even, I think aptly put in the Western church society, over our superiority over another church. It's more of, it's a natural outflow of us being so passionate about the gospel and people being reached, and us getting so over our heads in what we're trying to do, because that's where God always shows up. If we know what we can do, if we have a plan and we can figure it out, we don't need God anymore. And that's where the Western church has fallen into a pit, I believe, is we always have to have the strategy and the means of going about what we do. But it's not saying we don't have plans, because we need that. That's wisdom. It's what God shows, and often the Holy Spirit works in giving. I mean, part of the spiritual gifts is the gifts of administration and the apostolic ministry of being able to plan and set things in motion that's going to last for an eternity. But in this, we need to not be at a point where we can see the plans. We need to be reliant on listening to what God has for us and his heart, and what communities we can reach, what social justice movements we can pair along with and be a part of. I think that's one of the key ways that we as a Christian community can get engaged in a meaningful way with non-Christians, because when you have a movement that you're choosing to give your life to and a part of, people see that and respect it and understand it, and it's not that becomes the focus over Jesus, but it becomes, when they're asked, why are you so passionate about this, or why do you want to reach these people, and you start to tell them, well, I believe Jesus cares about them, and so I want Jesus sacrificed so much for me that I want to then express this to other people in tangible ways. And I think that as we engage in those things, as we engage in giving, of being generous, as we expand outside of just how can we create a good Sunday experience, how can we have a great life group that rehashes the sermon and goes through that, and instead become focused of how do we make this reach people, because Pastor Chris and Casey and the rest of the staff and team, their focus is making sure that we're being fed and taken care of and equipping us so that we can go out and reach people. Not that they're going to still keep going out and doing that. I know their hearts. But their job is equipping us so that we can be maturing into the fullness of Christ, as Ephesians says, and for us to be equipped to go out and reach the lost people, because that has been his heart from the beginning. And we see throughout the Bible that when the church turns in, like Israel did in the Old Testament, the prophets had to come and remind them over and over and over again to come back to God, because they got so internally focused that they were the blessed ones and that it was exclusive to them, and they turned and corrupted. And God had to straighten them out to go back out, and he forcefully exiled them so that they would be among the nations and the nations would see. And I don't believe that's our church, and that's not our heart, and that's not who we are. And it's a matter of being excited to go out into the lives of people that we don't know and build relationships and connections and put ourselves out there, be open to ridicule, be open to being maligned, because people may see or hear our motivations of bringing the gospel and they may hate us for it. But knowing that in the midst of that, God is still going to be doing a mighty work. It's where we're going to see the miraculous happen. And the miraculous is never on its own. It's always predominantly as a sign to show people the gospel and that God is real and that he's actively behind this mission to bring people into relationship with him. And so I think that we have the balance of people wanting to see the lost. We have people wanting to see the supernatural happen. We want to engage in prayer. And all of that comes into alignment when we're actively seeking out bringing people into Jesus, and to think that it's going to happen. And believe me, I am top priority number one of people who live the life of I want to be with Jesus, and I have no idea how to reach other people, so I'm going to stay home and shelter myself and hope that the church does a better job and I can reach people once they're in church. I don't think there's probably anyone in this church who fits that bill higher than I do, seriously and legitimately. And so it's a huge change coming out of that, but it's what God has for us. It's what we need. It's his desire, and to stray away from that is a heartbreaking experience of straying from the heart of God.